What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka NYPrepper. In this video, I want to talk to you guys about how to find water after SHTF, or if you're in a wilderness survival situation. So I'm going to talk to you guys about finding water in the wilderness, okay? And so I'm going to talk to you about some of the simple ways that you can find water, all right? I like to keep things simple. In a survival situation or an SHTF situation, you want to have simple methods to survive. If you get too complicated with things, you're not going to remember everything. And a lot of times the really complicated, fancy stuff doesn't actually work in the real world. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys some simple, reliable ways to find water. All right. And so in this video, there's going to be like two parts. The first part of the video is going to be like a classroom lecture where I'm going to share with you guys the concepts and the things you need to know. And then the second part of the video, the end of the video, I'm going to take you out into the field and I'm going to give you some real world examples from my part of the world, which is north central Pennsylvania, the northern temperate forests of the United States and North America. I'm going to show you guys some real world examples, okay? So this way you can kind of put it all together from the classroom to the real world, and it'll get you guys to think, all right? So we have two ways of finding water in the wilderness, okay, according to me. We have topography and vegetation, all right? So you can use topography and vegetation to your advantage to figure out where water sources are. So by using topography and vegetation, you can find water no matter where on earth you are. Whether you're at the poles, whether you're in some of the northern latitudes, the mid-latitudes, the equator, jungles, deserts, temperate forests, boreal forests, it doesn't matter. Topography and vegetation are always going to show you where the water is, okay? So you want to generally look for topographical features that are going to collect water, where water will flow through, or kind of like funnel water, okay? And where water would condense or precipitate, all right? So where water flows, where water would collect, where water would condense, and where water would precipitate, okay? So if we're talking about precipitation, we're talking about snow, sleet, or rain for the most part, okay? So examples of topographical features that water flows through, or where water collects or condenses or precipitates, we're talking about ravines, draws, valleys, plateaus, benches, saddles, okay? And I'm going to get into more detail on the topographical features in a minute. So topography is always going to help you find water. You want to look for where water will flow, where water is going to collect, and where water will condense and precipitate, all right? Keep those four things in your mind, all right? Flow, collect, condense, precipitate, okay? Next, we can look at vegetation, okay? Tree cover and vegetation will always tell you where there's some kind of moisture or water, okay? So, for example, certain species of trees need a lot more water than other species of trees, okay? Generally speaking, evergreen trees and conifer trees need more water than hardwoods, okay? So trees like hemlocks, firs, spruces, usually you'll find those types of trees in moister areas, okay? Areas where there's more water in the soil, okay? And trees that are deciduous like hardwoods, you know, oaks, hickories, maples, trees like that are usually going to prefer more well-drained soils. Doesn't mean that there won't be moisture where they grow. You know, there could be standing water where hardwoods grow, but generally speaking, you're not going to find a lot of standing water or very moist soils in areas where hardwoods grow. Okay, so that's just a general rule of thumb. Okay, deciduous trees or hardwoods will usually be growing on well-drained soils or better drained soils. And yes, at times if there's a lot of rain or if it's springtime and there's snow melt, hardwoods will grow in areas where there's a lot of water, because you're going to have a temporary increase in precipitation or snow melt or whatever, but eventually that water is going to drain through and it's not going to sit there for a long period of time throughout the entire year. Okay, but trees like hemlocks or let's say the balsam fir, they like soils that are constantly moist throughout the year. Okay, so I can't tell you all the vegetation that you need to know. You have to research for yourself where you live, where you're going. If let's say you're going on a vacation somewhere overseas or you're going to another state and you're going to do some outdoor activities, you need to research the vegetation in those areas where you're going to be, so you know which types of vegetation will grow in moist areas and which types of vegetation will grow in more dry areas. Generally speaking, trees and shrubs in general like to grow in areas where there's moisture, okay? So if we're talking about very dry climates like Arizona, New Mexico, places like that, in really dry climates like that, if you see trees, that means that there's a good solid water source in that area, okay? If you see trees in a particular area, that means that there's some kind of water there, because trees can't grow without a lot of water, okay? So just looking for vegetation in general will help you find water if you're in a dry climate, okay? If you're in Africa, if you're in Arizona, places like that, okay, that are really dry, if you see trees and shrubs, that means there's water there, okay? Either there's some kind of rain and the rain is pretty frequent, or there's some kind of micro topography that's pooling water in a certain area and it's allowing trees to grow, okay? So vegetation, all right, different types of vegetation, and in general, if there is vegetation or not, will help you find water. And in my part of the world, in the northern temperate forests of North America, okay, generally speaking, coniferous trees are going to be growing in moister areas, and hardwoods are going to be growing in more well-drained areas, okay? Most pine trees are going to be growing in sandy soils or soils that are very well drained, okay? So that's something to keep in mind. So now I want to go back to the topography and get into more detail with the topography. So going back to topography, let me give you guys some more examples of topographical features that you should be aware of if you're trying to find water. Generally speaking, north-facing slopes will usually be more moist than south-facing slopes. And the reason why is that south-facing slopes get more direct sunlight throughout the day and throughout the year, okay? So that sunlight hitting the ground on the south-facing side of a mountain is going to dry that soil, okay? It's going to dry that south-facing slope, okay, of the mountain, versus the north-facing slope. You're going to get less sunlight, less evaporation, less melting, if we're talking about snow and ice, okay? So the north side of any kind of hill or mountain will generally be moister, and you're going to have more snowpack and more ice, okay? So if we're talking about like late spring, where you may still have some snow left around, some patches of snow, you could try to find a north-facing slope, and you might still have a couple inches of snow there because the sun didn't hit it and it's not as warm on the north side, versus on the south-facing slope, the sun hit that slope and melted all the snow off, while the north side could have 6 inches or even a foot of snow. Okay, so north-facing slopes, all right, usually you're going to find more moisture there and more snowpack, and you can melt that snow or ice into water. Another thing to keep in mind is that the top of any kind of mountain or hill is usually going to be drier, okay, than the surrounding area. And the reason why is, think about it logically, okay? If you're on the top of a mountain, gravity is going to push the water down through the mountain to the bottom of the mountain, okay? So generally speaking, the very tops of hills and mountains are not going to be as moist as the valleys below, okay? Because the water is going to drain down through the mountain via gravity, okay? So any kind of mountaintop or hilltop is usually going to be pretty dry, okay? It's not going to be easy to find standing water on the top of a mountain or on the top of a hill, usually, okay? Just generally speaking. So the next topographical feature you want to look for is a draw. A draw is literally just a valley along the side of a hill, okay? A draw is like, imagine a valley or a ravine that goes up a mountain, okay? That's a draw. And so what happens is the water drains down from the top of the mountain into the draw, and then the water goes down the hill via the draw. And then usually there's some kind of a valley on the bottom of the mountain, and the water drains down the draw and into a river that's on the bottom of the mountain, okay? So you want to look for a draw, and the way to find a draw is very easy, okay? If you're in hilly terrain or mountainous terrain, literally all you have to do is just walk along the side of a hill or a mountain, okay? Just walk along the side or along a ridge, and eventually you're going to come across some kind of a draw. And the reason why is water has to run down off the mountain somehow, okay? And via erosion and gravity, draws are going to be created over time because the rain or precipitation, as it flows down the mountain, it's going to cut these valleys along the sides of the mountain. And so draws are going to be created, okay? So there's literally no mountain and no hill on earth that doesn't have a draw, okay? Every hill and every mountain on earth is going to have a draw. And if you can find a draw, that means there's usually some water in that draw. How much water is in the draw depends on a variety of factors, okay? It depends on how dry the area is in general. You know, if you're in a very dry area like Arizona or Africa, those draws might be dry for the most part in between rainstorms. But if there was a recent rainstorm, that draw is going to be swollen with water, and there's going to be tons and tons of water, okay? If you're in a more temperate area like here in Pennsylvania, even in between precipitation events like rainstorms or snowstorms, you're still going to have a little bit of water in those draws, okay? Because there's just a good amount of precipitation in general in the temperate parts of the world. So it's not going to dry up completely. And if you have to, you can dig down and find water. If you dig down even just a few inches, sometimes you'll find some water, okay? So draws, okay? Walk along the side of a hill, walk along the side of a mountain, and you're going to find a draw. And if you find a draw, chances are there's going to be running water, or there's going to be some kind of water in the soil. And if you dig down a little bit, you might be able to find some, okay? The next thing is going to be valleys, okay? If you can find a valley, you're going to find water, okay? If you have two big hills or two big mountains, 90% of the time there's going to be water in between those hills and mountains, okay? Because of gravity, all right? The water's flowing down the mountains and it's going to collect in between the mountains, okay? So there's going to be some kind of moisture, all right? Depending, again, what part of the world you're in. If you're in Africa or Arizona, you know, the valleys might be pretty dry unless you dig down into the soil, and then there might be some water down in the soil, a couple feet or a couple inches, okay? In the temperate regions, like here in Pennsylvania, you're going to have streams or creeks or rivers, okay? So you want to find a valley, all right? That's another option for you. Another option is a saddle, okay? A saddle is basically like a mini valley, all right? It's kind of like a valley on the top of mountains. So this is a saddle, okay? This little dip here between these two hilltops is what's known as a saddle, okay? And it's called a saddle because it literally looks like a saddle, okay? It looks like you could sit on that, all right? So you have one mountain here and there's like two little bumps on that mountain, or you might have a mountain range and these might be two separate peaks and there's like a little mini valley between them, all right? And so most mountain ranges, most hilly terrain will have saddles, okay? So this is a natural area where water is going to pool and collect, okay? Right in here, because gravity is going to force the water down, you're going to have pooling of water here, okay? This area is going to be more likely to have wet areas and water is going to naturally collect there, okay? So that's another thing you want to look for. Another thing is plateaus and flat areas, okay? A plateau is just a flat area, okay, in a mountain range, okay? So this is a plateau. You know, it's just a flat area, okay? It's like if you took a mountain and you just sliced off the top, that's a plateau, okay? Plateaus are naturally going to collect water because when you have precipitation, it's going to naturally settle here. Okay, the water is going to settle and it's not going to want to run down like on a mountain. On a mountain, when the rain comes down or snow or whatever, it's going to naturally want to flow down the hills, okay, down the sides of the hills, down the slopes, okay? Plateaus are naturally going to collect the water. The water is going to stay there longer. It's not going to drain as fast. So there's a good chance you could find some water here, some standing water or just moisture in general, okay? Another thing is small depressions that are created by natural forces such as uprooted trees, okay? Trees are constantly falling in the forest. So when these trees fall over, they leave a giant depression in the ground and water will naturally collect in those uprooted areas where the trees fell over, where the roots were. There's like a huge hole in the ground, and after a rainstorm, water's naturally going to collect there and the soil is going to be moist there, okay? So that's another option. And just microtopography, what I call microtopography is just like the way that the soil settled many, many years ago. You know, you have boulders and rocks underground, and over time the soil settles, and what happens is you have natural depressions in between those boulders that are underground, in between the bedrock. You're going to have like little depressions, okay? And water can collect in those depressions when it rains. So you can literally go in and just scoop up the water with your canteen or some other way, okay? You can use a cloth, a shirt, a rag, a bandana, a shamag. You can absorb water that way, all right? But you have like microtopography created by boulders underground, and over time the soil settles in between those boulders, so you have little depressions in the forest or anywhere you go, okay? There's literally no place on earth that's like perfectly flat, okay? That's just not normal in nature to have something perfectly flat like a parking lot, okay? There's always going to be little depressions because of the bedrock, because of the boulders underground, and those depressions you could find water. The water's naturally going to flow into those depressions. Another option is subterranean sources, okay? Caves, things like that. You can also collect dew from vegetation, okay? Dew or frost. If you have a frosty morning in the springtime or in the fall time, what'll happen is you'll get frost, and then the frost will melt as soon as the sun comes up, or shortly after the sun comes up. The temperature rises and all that frost will melt, and then it'll basically turn into dew. And then at that point, you can absorb that condensation or that frost with some kind of cloth, okay? You can take a bandana or a t-shirt or a rag or shamag. You can tie that around your pants. You can walk through some vegetation, and your rag or shamag or bandana, whatever, it's going to absorb the moisture, and then you can just squeeze it out, wring it out into a canteen. I mean, you can literally just walk through vegetation that has condensation on it, okay, dew or melted frost, and even just your clothing will absorb the moisture, and then you can just wring out your clothing into a canteen, put a water purification tablet inside, and you're good to go, okay? So dew, frost, condensation on vegetation, that's another way to collect water. And then finally, you have melting snow. All right, you can melt snow. That should be obvious, and ice as well. So now I'm going to show you guys all of this in the real world. So stay tuned. So here we have a plateau, guys, and this is also an open hardwood forest. At first glance, you wouldn't think there would be any water here, but a plateau is actually good because it's flat. Anything flat is going to collect water, okay? So plateaus are good, and even open hardwood forests located in a flat location will have some water, some standing water after rain or wet periods. So this is actually a good spot. So if you're in an open hardwood forest like this and you don't have any canopy, it's fall or spring, this is actually not a bad area to collect water because you don't have a canopy. So if there's any kind of precipitation, it's gonna collect on the ground here, and you can find little depressions like this that might fill up with some water, and you might have to get creative with how you collect that water, but you might find some water in an open hardwood forest like this. But generally speaking, an open hardwood forest like this is going to be usually dry, okay? Because hardwood forests and hardwood trees, they don't like very wet conditions. They can survive in wet conditions, but generally speaking, they like kind of drier conditions or semi-wet conditions. You can actually see this area must get wet at times because we have some moss here on the bottom of these oaks. You can see we even have some fungi here, a lot of moss on the ground. So these are some indicators to look for. So this area probably gets a little bit wet after some rain. You can see there's kind of a dip here, so it's kind of a little bit of a bowl, so the water will collect into this bowl, and the moss tells us that, okay? And you can actually do some poking, and you can see if the ground is wet under the leaf litter. So all we have to do is just, move some of the leaf litter, and you can see that the ground is moist, okay? And it hasn't rained here in at least 24 hours. So after a rainstorm, this area would definitely have some small amounts of standing water. You can see a lot of these oaks here have moss on the bottom, and some of these maples here. So an open hardwood forest is not the best area, but it's not the worst area either, especially in the fall or spring, or even in the winter, depending on what part of the country you're in. And here in northern Pennsylvania in the winter, this would all be white right now. So all you'd have to do is just melt some of that snow using your body heat. But you can see there's a depression here. I bet at one time there was, maybe a uprooted tree here or something that just rotted away, and it left this depression, and these depressions will collect water. But another thing you can do is look at the trees, look at the terrain, okay? And so if we look around here, you can see that it's relatively flat. There's no terrain feature here that would kind of funnel water and create a river or a stream. So all we have to do is just look for smaller depressions and wet areas in this flat plateau area. Plateaus are great, okay, because anything flat will collect water, okay? It doesn't necessarily have to be a depression. Even just a flat area like this will have some small depressions from uprooted trees or boulders that are underground that create natural depressions. You can collect water there. But if we look at the trees here, okay, you can see down over there we have a stand of hemlocks and firs. And so hemlocks and firs, they generally prefer wet areas, okay? So looking at the trees is going to tell us if the area is going to be more wet or less wet, more moisture. And so, like I said, hardwoods generally do not prefer wet areas, although they can tolerate wet areas. Like here we have all these oaks. You can see that it gets wettish here with the moss, but it's not wet right now. I'm not standing in water, so it only gets wet sometimes here. But trees like hemlocks, like down there, all those hemlocks down there, they usually need water and very moist, cool conditions to survive. So if you see a stand of hemlocks, it's almost a guarantee that there's some standing water there or there's water nearby. Usually you'll see hemlocks in swampy areas, boggy areas, or in very steep ravines because of that moisture, okay? So I'm gonna head over there by that stand of hemlocks, and we're going to investigate and see if we can't find any standing water there. I'm almost certain that there is some standing water there. So that's another option. If you can't find any standing water here, if it's dry, if it hasn't rained in a while, you can't find anything here, okay, look around, okay? Look for some stand of conifer trees, okay? Hemlocks, firs, those types of trees need water, a lot of it, okay? Usually you'll find them very close to a water source or even in a water source. So it's almost a guarantee if you see a hemlock or a fir tree, there's going to be some water nearby, okay? Another thing you can do is you can look for some brushy areas. Okay, it's kind of open here right now. It's mid-April, so there's no vegetation yet. Okay, it's basically still almost like fall or winter here. Okay, April is still very early for northern Pennsylvania as far as spring goes. There's no grasses sprouting up. As you can see, everything is still dead. But, there's a whole bunch of mountain laurel down there and rhododendrons. And I can walk through that mountain laurel and through those rhododendrons with a cotton shirt on, or maybe a bandana or a shamog. And as I'm walking through those laurels and rhododendrons, any moisture that's on the leaves of those bushes is gonna, go onto my cotton shirt, whether it's a sweatshirt, t-shirt, whatever you have, okay? And it's gonna get that cloth wet. And then all you gotta do is just wring it out, okay? Squeeze it out into your canteen and you got fresh drinking water. You don't even have to purify it because that's, rainwater. It's already distilled. There's no parasites or bacteria coming out of the sky. You know, so that's something you can do. If it just rained, you can walk through a brushy area and try to get the water to absorb onto some kind of cotton cloth. Cotton is going to be your best bet because cotton holds moisture the best. So if you have like a cotton bandana or you know, shamag or cotton sweatshirt, you know, put that on and just walk through, get that thing wet, take it off, squeeze it out, and you're good to go. Okay, so you could do that right after a rainstorm. You could do it in the morning when there's dew. You know, if you have grass on the ground, like normally here in the summer, there's just tons of ferns and grasses everywhere. The whole forest floor is just covered with ferns. You know, if I were to, let's say, take some cotton cloth and tie it around my ankles up to my knees and just walk through those ferns and those grasses with the cotton cloth around my lower legs, it's going to soak up all that water that's sitting on those ferns in the morning or after a rainstorm. And, you know, I can really absorb a good amount of water. And at the very least, I could at least, you know, get a nice little drink. If I can't get enough water to fill my whole canteen up, at least I'll be able to, you know, wet my mouth a little bit and rehydrate a little. So those are some options right here. This is just a, you know, open hardwood forest. You wouldn't think there would be much water here, right? I mean, there's no river, there's no stream anywhere, but you know, if you look hard enough, you can find stuff. So I'm gonna head over there into those hemlocks and I'll show you guys what's over there. And then I'm gonna head over to those mountain laurels and I'll show you how to collect water with the mountain laurels walking through the brush. All right, guys, so it actually started to rain. You can see the ground is all wet, and sounds kind of crazy, but if you're really thirsty, you could also just roll around on the ground a little bit, let your clothes absorb some of that water on the ground. But if you look, you can see there's just a ton of moss over here on all these logs and rocks. Look at this. You see all this moss here everywhere? So that tells me that this area gets wet. And so I'm going to try to walk towards some of these mossy areas and look for any kind of standing water. And I can already see here that there's signs of like some kind of seasonal stream here. You can see how the ground is discolored. It's like a blackish color. And I'm sure we're gonna find some water here pretty soon. And I can already see some standing water. Check this out. We already have some water here, guys. You see this? See how quick that was? So there you have it. We have even more water over here. Look at this. Look at all this water here. Okay, so just gotta know what to look for and you'll find the water. Now let's head over there, see if there's any water back there by those hemlocks. I'm sure there is. I mean, I could even just follow this little water source here and you can see it goes towards those hemlocks. But let's say this water source wasn't here. Let's just check out these hemlocks and see if there's any water in there. I'm almost certain there is. We can already see these little mossy patches here on the ground. That tells me that this area gets wet, okay? So you gotta just know how to read the forest. You see all this moss here, okay? So this tells me that the area gets wet. And let's head inside here to these hemlocks. And I'm positive we'll find some water here. there we have it. Look at this. See this standing water here? This is exactly the type of area that hemlocks grow. This type of area, very wet, poor draining soil. Okay, so look for the hemlocks, guys. Look for the hemlocks, look for the firs. They're gonna tell you where the water is, okay? Either standing water, or there might be some rivers or streams, okay? There's just an abundance of water here, no shortage. So let's just check out that brush now. I'll show you what I mean with that brush, how easy it is to collect water from just walking through brush. You can actually see how this water just drains out from the hemlock stand. It drains out here, okay, and then it goes into the hardwoods and then it disperses. So you could just see all the moss on these trees here. You know, when it's really raining hard and it's, you know, a wet season, this area is probably full of water. But it's been dry the last 2 weeks or so. Usually April is a dry month in Pennsylvania. And it starts to really get more moist like near May. More rain and stuff. So there you have it. All right, guys, so here we have a bunch of mountain laurel, and you can see that the mountain laurel is soaked. There's water on each leaf, okay? And it's raining now, obviously, but if, let's say, the rain stopped or it recently rained, the water would still be on these leaves, okay? It's a good amount of water there. Look at all that water sitting on these leaves. And it's just so thick. There's so much of this mountain laurel here. All you would have to do is just walk through it with some kind of cotton cloth tied to your body, or just wearing cotton clothes. And that water is just gonna soak right up into the cotton, and then you just wring it out. So mountain laurel grows all across the eastern United States, especially in the Appalachians, you know, also rhododendrons. So that's another way to collect water. Look at this wall of mountain laurel. And this just goes on and on. You know, just walk through this stuff and you'll pick up a lot of water. Just remember not to eat mountain laurel, because mountain laurel is poisonous and it'll kill you. Okay, so don't eat any mountain laurel. Don't cook it. Even the juices, if you get the juices on your hand, let's say you're, you know, grabbing the leaves and you smear the leaf on your fingers and you get like that greenish stuff on your hand, that will have toxin in it. Okay, so don't then put your fingers in your mouth or, you know, eat food with your hands. Okay, be very careful around mountain laurel. But you can see all the water on these leaves. Okay. All right, guys, here's an example of another area that I know for sure is going to have water. How do I know? Because look at all these spruces, firs, and hemlocks, and tamaracks. These are all trees that grow in moist areas. So all I have to do is just walk a little bit through here, and we have ourselves a little stream over here. Check this out. Got ourselves a little stream. Okay. Crystal clear water. Look at this. All the water you would ever need right here. Okay, look at how these hemlocks are literally growing right next to this little run here. Okay, they like these moist areas. Also balsam fir, if you live in the Northeast, balsam fir and tamarack. Okay, you can see that all these trees are growing near this run here, okay? So that's definitely something to keep in mind. So in general, if you look for conifer trees, a stand of conifers, you're going to find water. Here we have a swamp. Most conifer trees like water. So look for conifer trees, especially a big stand of them, and you'll most likely find some kind of water. All right, guys, so this is a draw. You see how it's really steep in there? And you can see we have a hilltop over here. And we also have the hilltop over here, okay? So I'm basically standing in this draw. And so basically these draws are formed just by erosion from thousands and millions of years of water flowing down the mountain. And it just cuts this ravine here, okay? And down at the bottom there's going to be water, okay? You can see there's a bunch of rhododendrons there. Rhododendrons like water. And I can already see that there's a ton of moss everywhere here. So this is an area to check for water. Okay, you want to try to find a draw. So it shouldn't be hard to find a draw if you're in a hilly area. All you have to do is just walk on the side of the mountain and you'll see some kind of a draw. It may not be as pronounced as this. It might be a lot smaller, but you will see some kind of a draw, at least one draw, from water running off the top of the mountain or off the top of the hill, okay? So that's pretty much it for the draws. All right, guys, so this is what a mountaintop looks like. And so generally speaking, mountaintops, you're not going to find any big bodies of water because the water is going to drain down off the mountain into the draws or down into valleys. So generally speaking, mountaintops are going to be dry, and you can see it's quite dry here. There's nothing here that indicates any kind of bodies of water. You can usually tell if you're on a mountaintop because of the vegetation. So if it's too thick to be able to see any kind of terrain features around you, let's say the canopy is too thick and you can't tell if you're on a mountaintop or not, you can just look at the vegetation, and usually mountaintops will be really thick like this, okay? You see there's a lot of underbrush here. We have a lot of saplings and a lot of rhododendrons, and we have some younger trees and a lot of openings. And that's typical for mountaintops because mountaintops are more susceptible to extreme gusts of wind. So you're not going to see a lot of old growth trees on mountaintops because they get blown over by the wind, by tornadoes, etc. So that's an easy way to tell if you're on the top of a hill or not, is to look at the vegetation. If you see a lot of stunted vegetation, a lot of young trees, a lot of openings like this, it usually means you're on the top of a hill, okay? So that's just a little trick, but you're not going to find any big bodies of water here. You might see some small puddles or something that you can take advantage of, but generally speaking, mountaintops are going to be very dry because the water is going to be running off of them or down below into the aquifer, okay? So here we have another mountaintop, guys, and you can see it's just bone dry here. I mean, there's just no water anywhere, okay? So this is not an area you want to be if you're looking for water. It's just bone dry here, look. Because it's right on the top of this mountain here. And the top is like right over there. So everything is just going to be running down off of this mountain here. So not a good area. You can see it's just, everything is just bone dry here. And it actually rained yesterday, and you can see it's bone dry. Everything just went right into the ground and down off the mountain. So this is not a good area to look for water. So down in there we have a little valley or ravine. We have a big mountain over there, and I'm standing on a mountain, and in between myself and the mountain over there we have a very steep valley or ravine, and you can actually see some greenish colored vegetation down there, which tells me that there's water down there. It's probably rhododendrons or hemlocks down there. If you look close, you can see we have rhododendrons down there. You can see a bunch of rhododendrons down there, and that tells me that there's most likely some water down there. Okay, so water is naturally gonna collect in this area here, okay? So it's almost a guarantee that there's water down there. If I were to hike down there, I'm 100% certain that there's water. So ravines and valleys obviously are going to have water of some kind. They may not have a huge river or huge stream, but you're definitely going to have some pooling of water. You're going to have some wet areas, some boggy areas that you can collect water from. So there you have it, guys. Ravines and valleys, most likely going to have some kind of water.